In this final movie, we'll burn through some of the remaining print options, most of which you don't need to worry about, but just in the name of full coverage, I'll show you what's going on. I've reverted to the last save version of this illustration, by the way, so it's no longer set to print color separations. And I'll press Control P or Command P on the Mac in order to bring up the print dialog box, and we'll switch to graphics. Now, for the most part, these options that I'm about to show you are designed exclusively for PostScript printing. Starting with flatness, and the idea is that printers can't really render super smooth curves. They have to convert them to polygons. But if you leave the automatic checkbox turned on, then they're going to be converted to infinitely complicated polygons. That is to say, there will be so many straight edges devoted to a circle, hundreds of them, that you won't be able to tell it from an actual smooth circle. However, if you were having problems printing, then you could turn off automatic and you could compensate by dragging the slider over towards speed, which is going to give you less complicated polygons. And that's not something I recommend unless you are really having problems, unless you really need to speed up a job. So when in doubt, leave automatic turned on. You don't need to worry about these next options except for this one right here, compatible gradient and gradient mesh printing. That's going to convert your gradients from vectors to pixels. Now, you only want to turn this checkbox on if you're having problems. So if you proof a job, which is always a good idea, and it comes back and some portion of a gradient is dropping out, for example, then you might have your printer turn on this checkbox. Notice it's going to give you a warning telling you only to use this option if you're having troubles. Just go ahead and click OK, and then try it out again. Now, even though it tells you that the resolution of the pixel art, any pixel effects such as drop shadows, is going to be rendered out for this document because it's a print document at 300 ppi, gradients and gradient meshes, and we'll see what gradient meshes are in the final mastery course. But in the meantime, they're actually going to be rendered out if they're converted to pixels, as when you turn on this checkbox. They're going to be rendered at 150 ppi, so half of this resolution. All right, now I'll switch over to color management. And you only need to worry about these options. If you're converting from the default space, that is the default CMYK space, which is US web-coded SWAP, and SWAP, by the way, stands for Specifications for Web Offset Publications. And the word web, by the way, has nothing to do with the World Wide Web, with the internet. It is rather a traditional printing technology. If, however, your printer tells you that you should be working with a different profile, and this is something you would want to find out from your commercial printer, then you could go ahead and choose it from the list. For example, I might be printing to a sheet fed printer and using uncoated stock, in which case I might select this option right here, and Illustrator will go ahead and convert your artwork as necessary. Now, by default, Preserve CMYK Numbers is turned on. That means nothing inside the artwork will actually change. So in other words, all the native objects, and you can read a description down there in the description field as long as you're hovering your cursor over the checkbox. The native objects, which are the path outlines and the text and so forth, the stuff that you've created in Illustrator, the numbers associated with those CMYK values will not change. They will remain fixed. However, something like an imported image, and there are imported images on the first three artboards of this artwork, they will be converted to this new profile. So in any case, that's something really to ask your printer about if you think you're going to make some changes. Something else that's interesting to note, if I switch from Adobe PDF up here to my office printer, this LaserJet Pro, then you'll see that the printer profile changes to sRGB. And that may seem odd that the printer is using RGB, but what ends up happening when you're printing to non-PostScript devices, this is LaserJet printers, this is inkjet printers as well, is your CMYK document gets converted to sRGB, and generally sRGB is the way to go. And then it gets converted by the printer to its printer profile in order to make everything look as good as possible, because different printers use different inks and different numbers of inks as well. Anyway, I just want you to see that. That's nothing that you need to change. All right, I'm going to go ahead and switch back to Adobe PDF here. So we're simulating a PostScript workflow. And the final thing I'll do is click on Advanced. And we should make sure that overprints are set to preserve, as by default when printing to a PostScript device. But I do want you to see here, if I switch back to my office printer, the non-PostScript device here, that overprints will change to discard, which is the way you want it to be. Because in that case, you're not really printing a CMYK document. It's going through an RGB conversion, and so your blacks are always going to print as rich blacks, so you don't need to worry about them. That whole rich black thing is specifically a commercial printing concern. And then finally, if an illustration is just not printing correctly, and you should not experience this problem, but if you cannot get it to print properly to your local printer, that is your inkjet device or your laser printer, a non-PostScript device, then you can turn on print as bitmap in order to correct those problems. But again, that's a DEF CON solution. So I know these are some very obscure options. If you want the short story, don't worry about them, but I just wanted to make sure I walked you through them just in case. And that, folks, is my cradle-to-grave discussion of printing your artwork as successfully as possible, either to a local device or to a commercial printer here inside Illustrator.